King George was appalled at the American Revolution, not because there were colonists who were rebelling against the rule of Parliament, but because he saw the covenantal implications of what was going on. He actually called the revolution, not the American Revolution or the colonial rebellion, he called it the Presbyterian Parson's Rebellion. He saw it as a continuation of the Scottish rebellion against his father some 20 years prior, when the Covenanters rose up and established certain standards against which the king could not act. In other words, they were saying there is but one Christ and Savior who wears the crown of all authority over all of the nations of the earth. There's one King of Kings and Lord of Lords. The King of Great Britain didn't much like that notion. He thought that he had a divine right to rule. So the American Revolution itself was drawn from covenantal concepts, concepts that held the king in check and that required action for justice when the king stepped beyond his bounds. A number of the Founding Fathers were influenced by Enlightenment ideas. Ideas which ultimately came to be known as deism or Unitarianism. Many were free thinkers. Benjamin Franklin, for instance, is a good example. Thomas Jefferson is another. And each of these men, in one way or another, demonstrated the fruit of their deism, their humanism, their Unitarianism, their free thought in their lives. But in their public demeanor, they were gloriously inconsistent. Benjamin Franklin was, after all, best known in the Constitutional Convention calling for prayer. The divine providence would guide all the proceedings of that great assembly. Thomas Jefferson read the Bible every day, even if he only read portions of it, as he was famously wont to do. The fact is that the Founding Fathers lived in the midst of an inescapably Christian culture. And though they were not perfect men, and though they did not always have their theology buttoned up and sewn up tight, they were men who lived in the midst of a Christian culture, reflected that Christian culture in much of their thinking, and if you examine even the most profligate of the unbelievers, men like Benjamin Franklin, they were deeply engaged in the theological discussions of their day. Whitefield, the great evangelist, George Whitefield, was one of Benjamin Franklin's closest friends and was constantly engaging Benjamin Franklin in thinking through the implications of the gospel. So when we talk about our Founding Fathers, we have to readily admit that deism was a seed thought that filtered into much of their proceedings and much of their thinking. But Christianity was the cultural backdrop. It was the stage upon which they operated, and it was inescapable for them. And the Christian capital that we have inherited even this far away from them, 200 years later in America, is evident. Well, the Founding Fathers did, at the Constitutional Convention, kind of want to have it both ways. They wanted all of the fruit of Christianity without confessing its root. And ultimately, that sowed seeds that would, in many generations to come, bring about a bitter harvest. And so, to be very honest, we have to look back at the Founding Fathers and see grave mistakes. The Constitution begins with startling words to come out of a Christian environment, words that hearken to the Enlightenment. We the people. Rather than we citizens under the hand of God or in the midst of the providence of God, they readily confess their Enlightenment roots. So yes, there are all kinds of problems with our Founding Fathers and with their thoughts. But no, they were not a contradistinction to the great Christian heritage of the West. They embraced it. They affirmed it, oftentimes unconsciously, but nevertheless constantly in all that they did and all that they said and all that they passed on to us.